Welcome to you who are joining us for our men's conversation for Men's Mental Health Month. We will be getting started here in a few minutes. We'll be getting started right at 6 p.m. So we're just allowing some people to come on in. So just come on in and we'll begin right at 6 p.m. Thank you. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for our Men's Mental Health Month conversation, where we'll be talking about fathering during a crisis. We'll begin momentarily. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. So we'll be starting right at 6 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to those of you who are joining us here for our men's conversation for Men's Mental Health Month. We'll begin momentarily. We're just waiting to get some other people in with us, and we'll begin right at 6 p.m. with our conversation. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for our conversation on mental health. You are in the right place. You're joining us on Facebook Live, fopcrva.com. We're waiting just for a few more people to join us, and we'll begin our conversation momentarily. We'll begin right at 6 p.m. Thank you. Welcome to those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live. We will begin our conversation on men's mental health for Men's Mental Health Month momentarily. We'll begin right at 6 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello again, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for this conversation on fathering during a crisis. We're brought to you by Friends of Prevention Coalition and RBHA, the Richmond Behavioral Health Authorities, and FOPC, the Friends of Prevention Coalition and RBHA. They promote wellness in our city to create and sustain healthy and safe communities. You can see their website at if you visit fopcrva.com. That's fopcrva.com. Welcome. My name is John Fife. I'm an associate professor of psychology at Virginia State University in Petersburg, Virginia. In my role, I teach numerous undergraduate and graduate classes and conduct research. So I teach classes on abnormal psychology, personality, multicultural psychology, and social and cultural factors that influence health and illness, as well as group psychotherapy. I also conduct research on spirituality and health and the impact of anxiety on achievement, specifically in ethnic minority students. I'll be moderating our conversation today, and I want to introduce you to our guests. We have two young men with us today. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ray Washington. Ray is a mental health worker in the city of Richmond. He grew up in West Point, Virginia, a small town here in Virginia, and he attended Christopher Newport University in Newport News. He's a former high school and college track and field athlete, and he currently lives in Henrico County with his wife and two wonderful daughters. Welcome, Ray.
Hello, how are you all doing? Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to introduce you to Dr. Mitchell Reed. He's a licensed clinical psychologist who's been practicing in the Richmond area for approximately 10 years. He earned his doctorate from Howard University in 2010, and he focused on child clinical psychology. In addition to that, he studies the impact of masculinity and gender development and family functioning on substance use and mood disorders. He's presented at numerous conferences, and he's published in the Journal of Men and Masculinity and the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. Dr. Reed has been completing comprehensive psychological evaluations, and he assesses mood and anxiety disorders, autism, and he also provides individual and group therapy for children. So welcome again, gentlemen. Ray, you said track and field. What events did you participate in?
Primarily field.
Okay.
I hate running, but yeah, I did on the 4x1 relay, and my primary event was long jump. Okay, the long jump. So speed. You're a speed guy. Yeah, jumping primarily.
Okay.
Awesome. I had a little speed, so I eventually ended up on a 4x1 team, but I was a jumper.
Okay. Well, welcome, Ray. Welcome, Mitchell. And so what we're going to do here is I'll just spend a few moments to kind of frame the conversation, because I know we're going to talk about men's mental health in general, because we're doing that particularly this month. So this is the second of 3 events this month. So we want to continue a discussion on men's mental health. As a nation right now, we're really in the midst of 2 crises. So there's a crisis of health and a crisis of the heart. The crisis of health is really COVID-19. The crisis of the heart is really associated with unresolved issues of race that we continue to struggle with for 401 years now. So the pandemic and recent protests have really challenged us in our family lives, and it's really challenged every individual, every man, in every town, every city, every state. All fathers have been affected, and we had a chance to really talk a little bit about this before as well, and we'll share some things with the people, and we'll also take your questions as well. We want you to know that you can submit your questions, and we'll be happy to try to answer them. One of the things that I'm seeing, though, is that this can be a time and an opportunity to really strengthen the bonds with our children, to really listen to their fears, to watch for signs of distress, and also to really build healthier, nurturing relationships with our kids. So for this conversation, we'll explore kind of the history of fatherhood in some ways in our nation, how culture has impacted fatherhood, how race and ethnicity impacts fatherhood. We'll look at the impact of the virus on children and on fatherhood, and also the impact of social unrest and racial issues on fathering and on children, so that we can really try to help some people and really dive into this and gain some knowledge in ourselves. So let me start by asking this question, and it's more of a historical question, because I believe that we have to put things within a context to really understand what is happening and how we can solve issues. So how has the historical events, let me start with that. How has historical events really impacted fatherhood? And I'll start with you, Dr. Mitchell.
Well, when I look at traditional events, I kind of think of those, or historical events, I think of those traditional ideas of masculinity and how those ideas have remained consistent over time and how some ideas have changed over time. With that level of being responsible for yourself and your family, have those ideas have transcended over time. I've also seen how different events have made aspects of masculinity not only care for your family, but cares for those around you. Those have maintained over time, and they're shown right now, given the unrest and the protest, and then the policy changes that have been enacted. You can see how those traditional ideas are in the movements that you see in society, living for one another, maintaining responsibility, looking out for one brother. We saw, I think there was a video from a gentleman in, I think it was England, how they were protesting and one gentleman was getting hurt, a white gentleman was getting hurt, and he took it upon himself to lift that gentleman up and take him out while his brother surrounded that gentleman. That is how fatherhood, maintaining one in your family, transcends over time. And that's kind of how I look at that.
That's really excellent. Thanks a lot. And you mentioned traditional roles, and I'll go to you, Ray, and ask you, how do you see historical events really shaping fatherhood from your perspective?
Well, as Dr. Reed said, and I'm gonna piggyback a little bit off of it, I think the male always being in a position of protecting your family. That's transcended, seemingly, in my opinion, through each generation that I've been able to see in my short life. Historically, I think, just from my personal experience, fathers from my past have been less emotional, more primarily focused on protecting and providing for the family, and less touchy-feely, go ahead and express your feelings, I'm gonna listen to you, hug it out with you type of situations. I didn't personally, that wasn't the male generation that I grew up under. I think it's shaping differently now. Primarily, I know myself, I'm very touchy-feely, and I don't know whether that's because I have two young daughters, or because I don't know. I don't know if I would be as touchy-feely if there were boys. So,
that's a really interesting point. I have two boys and a girl, and I think there's definitely something that is special about girls in terms of the way they can kind of touch your heart. But I really enjoy what you're saying, both of you, because I think there has been this resurgence, if you would, of protecting one's family, especially when we talk about COVID-19 and when we talk about race-related issues. What I'd like to do is go back even further in terms of historical context and think about how slavery may have shaped fatherhood. One of the things I think about is the fact that as African-American males weren't completely allowed to fulfill the role of provider and protector. And no doubt, according to W.E.B. Du Bois and other scholars, that would have had an effect. The system of slavery itself would have had some effect on African-American manhood, even though our resilience has really kind of come through that, and we've managed to survive. Your thoughts on that, Dr. Reed?
I definitely agree. And it also gets to the point that not only if your biological father wasn't there, there are many extended family members or people in the community who have to take on that role if the traditional biological father isn't there. And I think that speaks to a lot of what you're saying. Even though the father wasn't able to be there, there's other extended family members who take on that role and that responsibility to mold and teach the next generation, hopefully the pro-social values that we want to transcend generationally as we progress through time. So yes.
Absolutely. Ray, your thoughts on history as a legacy and how it's impacted fatherhood for African American men?
I was thinking about what Dr. Reed just said. I think proximity also plays a role in that as well. Over the years, families don't live on the same road and the same couple of back roads as they did. I'm a country boy, so from where I'm from, you know, your whole family lives on 2 or 3 roads, and because of that, you do have, if your father wasn't there, 6 or 7 uncles within walking distance that could fill that role. I think now people don't live as close to their immediate family anymore. And I think some of that plays a role in, you know, what kind of upbringing the child may have if the immediate core, you know, isn't available, isn't there for whatever reason.
That can certainly shift and change connection, and there can be a greater sense of isolation if proximity is affected. So if people are not living as close together as they used to, as you mentioned, Ray. I really wanted to start with this whole idea of slavery, because oftentimes we see it now in the protests where people are talking about dismantling institutionalized racism. And in my experience, I've had conversations with people who have thought that when I brought slavery up, that I was making an excuse. And so I think it's important for us to really talk about that, because it's not a matter of an excuse. It's a matter of really having to understand what the context of history is, and the fact that we didn't just impact the economic future of America, and our bodies weren't just enslaved, but there's a psychological impact of slavery. And that is what we are also working to dismantle. And we've been doing a lot of work in that area. But if we have to dismantle institutionalized racism, that is part of the work that needs to continue to make sure and to ensure that fathers can do the work with their kids that they need to. So any other historical events that you can think about that may have shaped fatherhood in recent years or in recent times? Dr. Reed?
I'm also thinking, given the fact that we see a lot of these videos coming out, and what we've noticed that since the 90s, when the videotape became more available, we've been able to visually see the abuse and the systematic oppression and abuse that we've had to endure over time, not only hearing the stories, but visually seeing it. I think watching some of the news on CNN, MSNBC of the Rodney King beating, and then just multiple videos, they show it back to back to back. So I think watching those videos over time, it has a traumatic effect on you, because you're systematically reliving those situations vicariously through those videos. Yes. So the trauma transcends that time span. So you're not only experiencing what's going on in this moment in time, you may be reliving the trauma experienced by somebody else, which, you know, kindles thoughts and events that occurred in your life. So it's just a snowball effect. So I think that's also part of the psychology of the system, of the systemic racism and oppression that we experience. I think
that's really a great point, vicarious trauma. And that's something I think that our society will become more aware of as we continue this conversation of race and of moving forward as a nation. So it's not just what I experience. is what I see and what I hear my parents, my brothers and sisters, my uncles and aunts, what they've experienced as well. And I carry that. And there are a number of studies, and I know you all know this, there are a number of studies that show that we carry these things in our genes, that our genes can be mutated and changed based on the trauma of our parents. And so that's really fascinating stuff to think about how that can really impact us as individuals. Ray? Didn't know if you wanted to share on that.
I think it's going to be all about survival. You know, you think about the parents the stories that you hear from your parents and how they raised you due to what they experienced and how to protect yourself in certain situations and what you better not say around this person or what you better not do around those people. That shapes how you think. And then on top of that, even if you, for some reason, don't believe it or, you know, think your parents are crazy for whatever they feel like they're, you know, trying to warn you about, then it happens to you. Now you carry that into who you're raising and your friends and how you react to different things. So I think, you know, you start to reshape how you live to survive.
Absolutely. I think you're right, man. Another historical event in our culture that I think has really shaped fatherhood is really deindustrialization. So moving from the industrial age to the post-industrial age to the age of information, which actually meant that the roles of men have had to change with more and more women going into the workplace, with the cost of living rising and that needing to happen as well. And of course, with just the women's suffrage movement and again, women fighting for equal rights, there's definitely been a shift. The globalization of jobs, suburbanization, all of these things have kind of shifted fatherhood and it has really affected, in particular, African-American, Native American, and Hispanic men, ethnic minority men. Those are some of the things that have really kind of shifted fatherhood. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Reed?
Yeah, I was thinking on that sense, the new role of provider has changed because in, let's say, 50s, 60s, 70s, and possibly some parts of the 80s, you could have a single family, the man working and provide for the household. Today, you need a dual income household just to make basic ends meet. And also now, if you look in the Black community, Black women typically are probably earning more than Black men in many homes. So you got to look at that role on the psyche of men, that you will potentially make less than what the woman brings. And how can you be a provider when the woman provides financially more than you? You have to change your role. You have to change that definition. And then also, I mean, kind of jumping ahead, COVID-19 changes this as well, because you can't go out and work. You have to work in the home setting. It may not be the job that you're credentialed in or the job that you're providing. You can't go out and provide. You got to find roles within the house and do telehealth or, you know, telework, which you may not be credentialed to do. So your role in the house as the provider, you may not be the main provider. That all has changed. So it could redefine how you look at yourself through the masculinity lens.
Yeah, I totally agree. That redefinition is a major part of the last few months, I think, for a lot of men. And the ability to be pliable with that definition of masculinity is really going to determine how well a lot of men do. So in other words, if a man is very stringent about the fact that he has to be the provider and he must, and he loses his job, then he may have more mental health problems. He may struggle more with fathering. He's going to have a much more difficult time than a man who understands that there are a number of ways to provide for a family, that the financial part is one part. Yes, it is important. But for example, I mean, if in my job, I have a 9-month appointment as a faculty member. So during the summer times, I'm off. My wife owns a business. She went in today. And I have 3 kids, 13, 11, and a potty training 3-year-old. Yeah, right. You're right. So every 15 minutes, we're on the pot, you know, but that is a part of of fatherhood. And in my mind, in my reframe, I'm building a relationship with him in a way that's different, even from my first two kids, because we potty trained them together. We shared that, but I'm doing most of this one, of this particular child. So I think how you reframe your role as a father becomes very important to your survival and to you thriving in the role of fatherhood. So you mentioned, Dr. Reed, you mentioned COVID-19. Share with us a little bit more. I'll start with you, Ray. How has COVID-19 impacted you as a father?
I think more than COVID-19, just the opportunity that I have to be at home and to actually help with the day-to-day things that I can't help with because I'm, 10 to 6, 9 to 5, 8 to whatever at work. A lot of that was going on during that time. I'm not, I guess, absent-minded too, but you get a realization of how difficult that can be as well to your wife or to your significant other. I've also found myself being more my role shifting with my second child than it did my first. I find myself being a lot more hands-on, I guess, than my first child, and I don't know, I can't put my finger on exactly what that is. But my aim has been really direct with both of my children. Like I've been a lot more focused on helping my 6-year-old process things, process what's going on, process racism, process what she may run into, instead of doing a lot of the babying. I do a lot more of the cuddling and emotional caring for my younger. And it's really direct. So I don't know if that is a result of the COVID or not, or the opportunity that I have to do it because of COVID or not, but I find myself being a lot more direct in my intentions with my children.
Thank you for sharing that, man. I think that really, it sounds like some of that is the virus and really helping you to kind of lock in on your child and your children. And I think that's part of what we're trying to get to is how can we take this situation with the virus and take advantage of it. The virus is trying to take advantage of us. We have to find a way of taking advantage of it. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Reed, how about you? How has this virus, COVID-19, impacted your fatherhood?
I think on two fronts. One, I have to be real to the anxiety that I feel about COVID-19 and the anxiety I have for my daughter now, because we were both high risk, given the fact that we both have respiratory issues and allergy issues. So, I mean, just the fact that if we go somewhere and somebody's not wearing a mask or washing their hands or just doing something that could put us at risk makes us worry a little bit more. So I think I've been more aware on other people's actions than I have before. Mm-hmm. And also changing, I didn't realize how structured I was before COVID-19, but my life is highly structured. I did the same things every day, the same restaurant on Saturday between these hours, the same place to play outside at these hours. I didn't realize how about rigid? I'll use rigid. I didn't realize until COVID-19 hit. So I had to be more flexible in creating similar experiences at home or within our home setting that could provide the same level of contact and interaction that I had with my daughter outside of the normal rigid schedule that I had in my head. So I've been very proud of the fact that we've been able to do that together, me, my wife, and daughter. So that's what COVID-19 has done for me. Increased my anxiety, but I'm proud of the fact we've been able to deal with the new changes we had to implement in our home.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, again, it's so important for men to hear that, again, a difficult circumstance can be turned on its head and used for good. And it sounds like you've actually grown in flexibility. It seems like you're a very structured guy from what you're saying. You have something to do at a particular point in time. And what's important too is I'm sure that your daughter sees you going through that process of being flexible. you know, when vulnerability has to rise because those things, that restaurant isn't there on Saturday. So thank you for sharing that. We have our first question. I want to get into this really quickly. I'll start with you, Dr. Reed, and this is the question. Speaking of trauma, can you speak to the hesitancy for African Americans to seek mental health supports? In other words, airing our dirty laundry, or that's just how Uncle Bob is. Can you speak to that?
I think it's a huge question, but I'll address it on 3 prongs quick. One is access and identifying symptoms, because if Uncle Bob has been that way for 20 years, you kind of get comfortable in the chaos that Uncle Bob provided, so you may not notice that is it a mental health issue. Second is access to, how do I know where to go if I see Uncle Bob having these experiences? And then also being aware of how pride may influence your willingness to go seek out care, and how and where you seek out care too. Going to your cousins or, you know, somebody within your family may not be the avenue to take. Telling your friends, maybe going to an actual licensed professional, knowing how to access them and when it's appropriate to reach out to them. And I think I will say this I think men have gotten a lot better. I've been practicing for 10 years, and I'll tell you, 2010 is a lot different than 2020. I think men are a lot more aware, a lot more willing, and a lot more vulnerable to their mental health needs, as well as their social needs and their relationship needs. There's a lot of men's groups and a lot of outreach done by not only RBHA, but other community resources in regards to men's mental health.
Yeah, it's good to know that we're making strides. Ray, your thoughts on that? You know, this whole idea that, you know, I'm not going to air my dirty laundry. I mean, you're a mental health professional as well. What are you seeing in that area? What are some of the things that we can do to help men?
Just talk more. I think because men, you know, we pride ourselves of being able to take it on the chin and keep it moving. That's what we normally try to do. And until we can't do it is when you see us break. I know from my personal experience, this year, 2020 has broken a lot of my friends and broken myself. Just with the Kobe dying, which was traumatic to my whole generation. And a lot of fathers, Black men, broke. And we witnessed it. And then right off of it, COVID-19 comes and all the deaths and, you know, the anxiety in the home. And, you know, I think it's been a very, very rough year for Black men particularly. And I think a lot of Black men have seen the need to seek support, which is they've been taken to the rink this year. And I think because of that, but I think because we are resilient, we try to fight through whatever we can fight through, even if we know we need to go seek the support. We try to fight through it. And I think, you know, we're strong and we can fight through a lot of, you know, what we deal with, you know, but it's just going to be important to talk, you know, find somebody to talk to, and somebody that can lead you, you know, to where you need, you know, to go as far as support.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Ray, because it's so simple, but it's so profound at the same time. Just being able to have a conversation and to understand that, yes, we're strong, we can deal with a lot, but we have to get to the point where we can tell where it's time to have somebody else bear some of the burden, that we don't have to bear all of that on our own. And that's something that we have to continue to learn to do. So thank you for asking that question. And one of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Reed, was the pride that might influence us to not seek help. And some of that pride, again, comes from that historical context where we've been taught, again, we cannot trust our institutions. And sometimes because of how our institutions have treated us, we feel like I'm not going to go in and talk to this person because I don't know where I may end up, or we don't know where Uncle Bob is going to end up. And so again, gaining access, asking questions, having conversations with our friends about maybe what they've done or what other people that they know have done, where they sought help, might be a really good place to start in terms of getting the help that we need. So we hope that was something that was helpful in terms of answering your question. So I mentioned two crises. We talked about COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 and how it affects fatherhood. How about the second crisis, racism, 401 years. And again, we saw another situation unfold in Atlanta on Friday night. Very different from the George Floyd situation, but again, very much in line with the experiences of African-American men and families. How has racism, and especially in the last few weeks, how has that impacted your fatherhood? I'll start with you, Dr. Reed.
I think first I have to recognize that a lot of these events have kind of triggered thoughts that I had suppressed from my past. I'm from Connecticut. I'm from Westport, Connecticut. Nobody knows it. It's a small town it's an affluent town, and I was one out of 8 minorities in the school, 1 out of 8 Black kids in the school. So it kind of brings up experiences that I had, and it makes me worry for my daughter, because she said something to me the other day in the sense like, are the police going to kill me because I'm Black like George Floyd? And I didn't know how to answer that in the moment. And it's funny because I'm watching the news, and you'd be amazed how much they absorb from just 2 minutes of listening. So we had to have the talk about when you tell adults and authority figures that your dad needs to be present or your lawyer, and don't answer any questions, and get your dad or mom involved. I think so. Racism hits hard because I don't know how my daughter's going to experience it, but I'm actively trying to have her avoid the experiences that I had, if that made sense. So yeah, and I'm just recognizing the trauma that not only I have experienced, but other people have experienced just through their interactions with society, through systemic racism, through just interpersonal racism. Yeah, it's on many levels. This has been traumatic. I can't think of any other word.
Yeah, I think that's as good a word as you can use. And I definitely hear you when you say, you're hoping, I think for all of us, we're hoping that our kids don't have some of the same experiences that we have. And my kids already have, and it's really kind of interesting. But I find that one of the things that I try to do is to tell my story. And I think that since this has been happening, I've been trying to incorporate my story more when I talk to them, and trying to end on hope, but also telling the truth about the story. It's like, hey, this is what really happened. And it kind of gives them some context, especially my son, for some experiences that he's had, because he's 13 now. And that's kind of interesting. Ray, share with us, man, how has the last few weeks really impacted your fatherhood?
Well, to start, my children are biracial. So that throws a whole different swing into, this situation. And on top of that, I live on the west end of Richmond, in Short Pump. So it's been layers of unpacking for my household as far as race goes. Proudly, I've already had to talk to my 6-year-old since she's been old enough to really understand color, and had questions. As soon as she started asking questions is when I started giving her more than she asked for. To explain to her, like, people may not like you. You're Black and you're white. Some people don't like Black out here. So that may be something that you run into. I'm not saying that all of your friends or anybody will say something to you, but you need to recognize that there is something that's being said to you that's unfair or that's pointing to some type of racism. So she was able to recognize that we were watching the George Floyd situation, as just for some disclosure. And we were I was actually on my phone, but it was on, the news was on. And she turned to me and she said, "Daddy, I was in school and my friend said his dad told him that black and white, my friend was playing with a black and a white rock, and his dad said black and white shouldn't be together." So I immediately started explaining what his dad meant, and how he was being racist in what he was saying to his son. And then halfway through it, I realized I didn't need to. She recognized what he meant, and that's why she was saying it to me. So it was a proud moment for myself, but it was a sad moment at the same time, where she's 6. Why is she dealing with that at 6? So it's sad, it's frustrating, it's angering, it's infuriating, but all you can do is educate, and teach survival.
Yeah, and the thing that really jumped out to me in what you're saying is how you had that mixture of pride and sadness at the same time. That's tough, man. You expect that when you teach your kids something and they recognize it, it should be pure pride. But in the issue of race, it can't be pure pride, because there's always the other person that's trying to rob your child of their identity, and to steal. It's sad. And in my situation, similar, where my children are biracial. And one of the things my wife and I started doing just really at a very young age is incorporating, of course, books into their life, but books with different shades of people, trying to talk about those issues, talking about those issues when they come up. But still, it's funny. It's not the talk, it's the conversations, because it never ends. And kids, as you were saying, Dr. Reed, kids know what's going on. I mean, when the George Floyd thing happened, I was going to tell my son, he was like, "Oh, you mean George Floyd?" He already talked about it with his friends. They're on social media, they're discussing things. He's 13 years old. So they're already having these kind of moral conversations. Some of the conversations that adults are afraid to have, kids are already having. But yeah, it's definitely difficult. And one of the things I like to do is, as I come across new knowledge, I just share it with them in a way that's age appropriate. My son he's 13, so he can handle a different level of conversation than even my 11-year-old right now. So we were just talking yesterday about the Robert E. Lee statue. And I was doing some reading and found out that it was donated by a segregationalist, a guy named Paul McIntyre. And it was a gift after Virginia created a law stating that there should be no interracial marriage. So it's interesting. That statue itself is tied to that idea. So I shared that with my son as a way of kind of bringing him into understanding the context of that monument and how it's related to who he is as a person, and trying to have those difficult conversations. But it is tough that you can't ever really celebrate those conversations, because the other side of that conversation, of that pride that you have, is concern about the next incident that's happening. With that said, how do we continue to have these conversations without traumatizing our kids? Because, I mean, we talk about vicarious trauma. How do we have these conversations without traumatizing our kids? Dr. Reed, any thoughts?
I like to, when I do talk and have these conversations with my daughter, I like to have her kind of lead the conversation from her experience, because I don't want to dilute what she's saying based on what I want her to feel and want her to learn. So I try my best. I try my best to listen to her experience, because she may not interpret it the way that I feel that she should have, or the way that I would have. So listening, making sure that she is aware of her own value, and people, her friends may not like her, but they have to respect her. Not only her friends in her classroom, but her adults and teachers and other people that may work with her or spend time with her. So I guess just listen to their perspective and experience. I think that'll be succinct with that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned a really important point about not projecting your own bias onto your kid. I know I've done that before. I'm gonna tell you right now, because I'm like, hey, I want you to understand my perspective and I want you to have my perspective, but it's not always the best thing to do. The best thing is really to kind of, like you said, let them lead the conversation, because then that way we understand how much they know. And it has baffled me at how much my kids know about racism, about various issues, about the political climate. I'm like, political climate? I don't think when I was 11, I was talking about political climate, but they know. So thank you a lot for that. Ray, what are your thoughts, man? How do we have these conversations without traumatizing our kids?
Exposure. I think to expose your kids to all different races. I know specifically for myself, you know, if I can't find enough minority where I am, I'll go seek it. So she knows that what's being projected on the news, and what's being projected in her school, or what somebody may be saying to her about Black people, or about this other type of people, or Asian people, or white people, she can make her own conclusions, because she has plenty of friends of all different races, you know, that she's been able to have experiences with, healthy experiences with. So I think exposure and continuing to talk to them through their issue, because kids will bring up the craziest things, but the most obvious things that adults don't want to speak to, kids will put it right on the table and make you have to do it right then. So I think, you know, you let your kid lead the way, but continue to expose them to what they need to be exposed to.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that in terms of exposure, because that certainly makes a difference for kids. We have another question here, and the question is this: how do we motivate men to seek support, to seek mental health support and help in rural and poverty-stricken areas? So how do we motivate men to seek mental health support in rural and poverty-stricken areas? I'll start with you, Dr. Reed.
Well, first, I think we have to ensure that the services are there for them to seek. So it goes to the policy changes and making mental health services more readily available to those at-risk populations or underserved populations. That's first. And then second, making it part of the normal conversation and not something that's so stigmatized, and making also people aware of signs, symptoms, and behaviors they need to notice so they know when to go seek out those mental health services. And due to time, I'll be real succinct. So just really, hopefully they're in that, hopefully changing policy, they're in that area. And then once they're in that area, knowing when and how to access them once they're there, and knowing the signs and symptoms. That was it. I was done.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Any thoughts, Ray? How do we motivate men to seek support for mental health issues, especially in rural and poverty-stricken areas?
To keep it simple, to be informed what's there. You know, I think with social media, there's many different ways to inform people. I think the service providers who are there, I think some of that needs to be put on their back too, to really inform people that they're available in certain areas, or whatever area that you're in, you know, advertise, even if you're not just having a forwarded post on social media. Like, that's very important. Everyone's on social media, and lots of people on social media have mental health issues that need to be supported. And I think that's a very important avenue, a very reliable avenue for people.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, and I think access is important. I also believe too that again having that conversations with men who may be in your life, and really talking to them about what they believe masculinity is really about. What does it mean to be a man? That's a really simple place to start, and I think that's where a lot of times we can begin to see. Um, the remnants of toxic masculinity, where we believe in this old way of thinking about manhood, where our masculinity is trapped into our physicality and not in our intellect, not in our emotions. And if you are a significant other and you have a man in your life that needs help, I think also highlighting the areas of strength that that man may have, encouraging them and saying what you see in them that's great and how much they're trying and the great things that you're doing, and also the areas that they can improve so that they can be even more available to you and to their children, is certainly another way. And it really speaks to the fact that we also need to have better networks. And I think that that's part of what Friends of Prevention Coalition is really about. So again, we're being sponsored by Friends of Prevention Coalition and RVHA, and you can visit their website at fopcrva.com. That's fopcrva.com. You can also find them on Facebook at facebook.com/FOPCRVA. And that's one of the things that Richmond Behavioral Health Authorities is really trying to do, is trying to create these avenues so that we can answer questions, trying to create these networks so that we can get information out to men who need help. Thank you guys very much for sharing that. We have another question here. Another question: what are some recommendations to engage men in activities or events that have traditionally overlooked them? What are some recommendations to engage men in events that have traditionally overlooked them? Dr. Reed, I'll start with you. What are some recommendations to engage men in activities or events that have traditionally overlooked them?
I guess, are we speaking into them reaching out to like screening events for mental health service?
Yeah, it's difficult. The question just says activities and events. So I think we can probably take that, the mental health piece, or any other type of activity that people may consider to be more feminine, quote unquote feminine.
Okay, well, I think I may be off, but I think starting early and making new activities normal at a younger age. So for example, let's go with nursing. When I was growing up in the 70s, nursing wasn't a career that a man would typically follow. So if you start early in exposing them to the healthcare field early in elementary school, middle school, and high school, whether it be nursing or psychology, traditionally feminine fields, just exposing and see what you can do and the changes that you can make, it makes it more normal, makes people want to achieve and work in those areas from a young age. And so they grow up wanting to be that profession, and it's not stigmatized that men can't be nurses or men can't be, physical therapists. I can't think of any other thing besides nurses, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
Early in those activities and starting from a young age and continuing that over time, and that will change the thought processes and the definitions of what a man can be in the professions that they can hold. And we can flip it for women too. Women can be engineers, and starting them off earlier in the STEM sciences and stuff, and also Black men in the STEM sciences, starting that off early and changing the thought process of what you can be and what you can achieve through education and outreach starting at a young age.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And when I think about the question in terms of some recommendation to engage men in activities that are traditionally overlooked them, I think about fathers who are preparing to be fathers, men who are preparing to be fathers, and how even a lot of the prenatal system isn't really set up and designed to include men. And that happens quite a bit. Now, there's been some changes, but we're still behind. And I think it's very important. One of the things I did, I really wanted to be involved in that entire process. And I know, of course, a child is going to have a special connection with its mother, but I wasn't going to be left out. So one of the things I recommend for fathers is to really ask a lot of questions, go to appointments, and really prepare yourself, because one of the things the research shows is that even babies at 8 weeks old have different physical reactions to their fathers than their mothers. It's really fascinating. So it shows the complementary nature of parenthood. So babies are not just happy when they see mothers. They're actually happy when they see fathers as well, and they tend to secrete certain hormones, and they sweat. They crouch their shoulders in when their fathers approach, and there's this whole idea of excitement that's coming. So, don't discount your ability as a father in that situation, and ask for the things that you need, especially if you're preparing to be a father or a dad. If you're already a father, don't look down on your position, because it's a very critical role. Ray, any thoughts on that?
I agree. Don't railroad yourself. I think the responsibilities of a father aren't just what we can do physically or how we can maneuver unemotionally, how we can problem solve, fix something. It's the emotional side of what a father provides to his children is huge, huge. I know last night, just to be personal, I was doing my daughter's hair, because in my home I do the girl's hair 99% of the time. So I'm doing her hair, and I'm really proud of it. So I'm all doing all kinds of crazy stuff with it. And in the middle of it, she says, "Daddy, you know what you do the best?" And I said, "What?" And I thought she was going to tell me a hairstyle. She said, "Being a daddy." And it was the sweetest thing ever. But she recognizes that I'm not just there doing stuff physically, and that made me feel good. So
that's great, man. You're gonna have to give me some lessons. I learned to braid hair, and I've slipped. I've been slipping. I'm gonna have to get some lessons from you. But thank you for sharing that, man. That is awesome. I want to move on to this question here, because I know we're very short on time. And so can you share with the single moms that are listening, who may not have the support of a man around, or of a father, can you share with them some of the things that they can do to find maybe a father figure, or some of the things that they can do to really help the children that they have? And I know a lot of single mothers have concerns, especially about boys, and especially given our current climate and what they're seeing. I've spoken to a lot of young women who are like, wow, how am I going to teach a boy these specific things? Can you share some thoughts and some tips that you can share with single mothers about that? Dr. Reed.
I would start off first looking into your family first, and finding those male figures in your family that you may not have communicated with or connected with over an extended period of time, and reaching out to them and integrating them into their lives, whether it be through experiences that they have with their cousins, with their uncles, or with anybody else, kind of creating those new experiences. And I'm just going out on a limb. If you guys are having difficulty co-parenting together, if the father is available, understanding what triggers you have in regards to that relationship and where that relationship breaks down, and from both sides, being able to overcome your own emotional hurdles for the benefit of the child, recognizing what you are doing to prevent the interaction of the male figure or the father to interact with the child. And if the father isn't available, just finding male figures in the family, male figures in the community, reach out to your churches, universities, even in your schools. There are activities, events that everybody can participate in that can hopefully get exposure to positive male influences, and make sure they're positive too, because a lot of times not every male influence is a positive male influence. Make sure they're pro-social males, encouraging those qualities and moral standards that you want your child to have, not just have any,
Thank you for sharing that. Again, we're talking about fathering in a crisis. We're sponsored by the Friends of Prevention Coalition and RBHA, and you can visit their website at fopcrva.com. Ray, some thoughts on that?
I think pay attention to your child. I think your child goes to different places every day. I mean, in the normal setting, they're in school, hopefully after school programs, sports. Listen to your child. They'll continually talk about someone that's making a difference in their lives, whether it's a coach, whether it's a particular teacher, whether it's a friend, whether it's a friend's parent. Somebody is going to make a difference to your child. Listen to your child and identify who that person is. And if that person is already providing them some type of support, identify that to that person, that, you know, my child is really drawn to you. You know, I'm a single mom. You know, you're really helping me out already. I wanted to acknowledge that. Not that you want to throw your child on someone else to make it a responsibility, but just kind of, you know, let that person know, or let who your children are drawn to naturally know that they're being a support to you. That way, that could possibly increase just from, you know, you being appreciative of what's already happening.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I think you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things I was actually thinking about. And interesting that you say that your kids are going to gravitate to a specific person already. You know, kids are kind of wired to look for that positive model. And it will be the job of the parent, like Dr. Reed mentioned, to make sure that it is a positive model, in fact. But kids they're looking for that. And as they speak positively about a particular person, as you mentioned, Ray, the parents can kind of, you know, make the introduction or have a conversation with that person in terms of the extent of the mentoring relationship. And those relationships are critical. I know last year, a few men from my church, we actually were mentoring some kids at a neighborhood elementary school. So about 10 men, got about 10 kids, and stayed with them all throughout up to February, COVID-19. But some of the things that we were able to see and the changes we were able to see in those kids were really incredible. And we're not their fathers, but we were still participating in fathering, because you don't have to be a biological father of a kid to father a kid. And I think that's really important. So if you are a man and you don't have a child, you know, you can look for that kid in your neighborhood, that kid that you can coach, that kid that you can, you know, spend some time with. And I know it's difficult right now, of course, in COVID-19, but hopefully we can get to that place soon where we can do some of those things. Also, you mentioned, Dr. Reed, co-parenting, and I think that becomes very important, especially in the case where it might be a very fragile relationship. And I know on June 29th, we'll have a conversation about mending relationships. So we'll talk more about that in 2 weeks at 6 p.m. again on Monday, June 29th. However, I definitely want to say it's important for parents to come with questions instead of demands. That becomes very important. Come with questions instead of demands. Come for conversation and for not debate, because it's very important that kids don't get put in the middle of parental conflicts. That's critical, because the research is very, very clear that that is not beneficial to kids at all. As a matter of fact, the research actually shows that it's better for a kid to be in a single parent situation that's stable than in a situation with two parents that's chaotic. So it's very important, as Dr. Reed mentioned, that we really examine where we are. If you know that the relationship ended badly and you have a bias towards that individual because of that, it's really important for you to maybe to think about that, have some conversations about that, maybe get yourself some help in terms of just relationships and how to deal with that, because I know as a parent, you want the best for your child. You want the best for that kid. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Mr. Ray Washington for sharing with us about his two wonderful daughters and his family, and for the advice that he's given. Thank you to Dr. Reed for sharing with us his experience in the clinical field and his experience with his daughter. Again, my name is John Fife. We are sponsored by the It goes right out of my mind. Richmond Behavioral Health Authority, as well as Friends of Prevention Coalition. And you can visit their website at fopcrva.com. We will have another event like this on Monday, June the 29th at 6 p.m. We'll be talking about mending relationships. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.